Thank you very much. I'm very pleased to have been invited to speak for the proposition on this debate. Before I go into my speech, I would just like to say something in relation to the two speeches we have heard before. It is very funny that the two speakers spoke nothing about the countries where slavery existed because of the British colonialization. And I am going to speak about slavery. I want to also say that we've heard about the aid that Britain is giving to former colonies or countries who are in need of assistance. But many countries that never experienced colonialization and slavery in the way that it was perpetuated by Britain are also giving aid to countries that need it. And we heard about what about the schools and the buildings and the roads. Well, those were put there for the English in order to allow them to rid our countries. In places like Jamaica, where we had the British living in England and sending out their minions to run the plantations, those roads and those services were only put in the places where, would you allow me to finish this? They were only put in the places where the plantations were and where they needed to get the material to the ports. For the rest of Jamaica, there was no infrastructure. When slavery was abolished, the slaves moved as far from the plantations as possible. If you see the hills and valleys and mountains that they had to climb to get away, you would say to yourself, as I have often said, slavery must have been terrible. Well, let me tell you how slavery was. Imagine you're being grabbed from your country. You're being put upon a ship and put across what is called the Middle Passage. And you get to Jamaica and you are stripped. And you stand in a square and people walk around and look at you. They feel you and determine whether they are going to buy you. And when you are bought, you are put on the plantation. There was no family life. It was not encouraged. If slaves developed relationships, they would take the children away. They would move or sell one of those partners to another plantation. And so what do we get today? We have countries where family life that our people knew in the places where they came from does not exist. Fathers were never encouraged to look after their children. When can you imagine when the slaves heard that there was going to be an end to slavery and there were children to be born? They hid in caves. My great-grandmother was born in a cave to make sure that she was not born as a slave. And that is what Britain perpetuated. Yes, I'll take it.
I agree that slavery is terrible, but I think that it has been an institution of humanity for thousands of years.
It does not make it right. Thank you. Thank you. It does not make it right. Right now, laws are being made or changed or repealed to remove what was something that was correct at one point, and is not correct anymore. You've said what you've said. Now, I want to speak about explaining why reparative justice is a necessary feature of the discourse on slavery. I want to talk about identifying the elements of focus when we are discussing reparations. Reparations is not just about money. There are many other ways of making reparations. Yes.
Do you think Caribbean leaders should pay reparations for the times indentured labor that they asked for?
Indentured labor is a completely different argument, my dear. We will deal with that on another occasion. Why is reparations necessary? The definitions that you have heard already is what we're talking about. What is it? We are to adhere to a moral imbalance. We are to try and correct that moral imbalance. The first undeniable factor is that the colonies where slavery was exercised profited not. The profit went to the plantation owners, many of whom presided over their fortunes from Britain and continued to amass significant sums of money even after the abolition of the slave trade. We have heard two names here of well-known Britons whose family made their wealth out of slavery. I watched the Olympics opening ceremony and that whole period that went into the development of the industrial era in Britain. I want you to know that that was fuel from slavery. That was fuel from the sugar that was produced in our countries. You walk around Britain today and you see the buildings, you see the marble. I went to Scotland and I was taken around and shown buildings that said, this was bought from the proceeds of a slave that was owned. And when slavery was abolished and payments made to the slave owners, they built that house. All over the UK is the tangible evidence of how the society benefited from the proceeds of slavery. No? We have been discussing this matter, and the reparations is not limited to the payment of money. There is, what about the cultural institutions? What about the public health crisis that exists in some of our countries? What about illiteracy eradication? What about the psychological rehabilitation that is required? What about technology transfer? What about debt cancellation? In our countries in the Caribbean, 50% of all of our budget goes towards the payment of debt. And why was that debt incurred? To put in place all of the infrastructure and the requirements to allow our countries to come into we're in the 21st century now, aren't we? Into the 21st century. Indeed, if you have ever watched a Channel 4 documentary, which was called The Empire Pays Back, yes, it spoke to the issue of a financial settlement. And it suggested that there was a minimum of $7.5 trillion that would be necessary as monetary compensation. But as I say, that is only one possible dimension of the argument. And it is not the sole basis on which reparations is to be accepted or rejected. It is for this reason that CARICOM has included the 10-point plan, some of them which I've told you about already. Many Caribbean countries really need help, not help as aid, but not a handout, but assistance to address the social infrastructural problems that exist in education and health, for example. I'm sorry? It doesn't always require money. It does not always require. We're not talking, earlier on we heard, who do we pay the money to? I'm not asking for you to pay the money to a government. I'm asking you to provide us with technical assistance, to provide us with the assistance that we need to help our education process. We don't need you to pay us money, although that would be good, because you have got our money. We need a public education awareness program. Too many people in this country here in the UK have no idea on what it is that their forefathers did to put Britain where it is today. No? So, one of the things that is required is an apology. A proper apology. An apology for what was a systematic and sustained pattern of enslavement that was preserved and fiercely protected for centuries. That must be part of the exercise going forward. It must be coupled with a willingness to engage former colonies on the matter and have a frank but open discussion about the issue and what is at stake. We in the Caribbean stand ready to lend its support in this endeavor. And we have already indicated our intention to convene a conference with European counterparts on the issue of reparations. The British Empire owned its existence and much of its ultimate wealth to the British Caribbean islands. There is a need for prompt and comparable British soul searching so that we can begin to properly address this dark period of our respective histories. I thank you.